Since 2021, diversity, equity, and inclusion has made it to the top of the agenda for most companies. With the launch of the Women in Business study, conducted by Kingsley Partners last year, we discovered the journey behind some of the most successful senior women leaders across various industries in the region. This year, we are taking this study global, starting with our new series, Her Corner Office. And today we are very privileged to having Jean Poon with us as our guest, sharing her journey and experience, being one of the senior women leaders. So welcome, Jean. How are you doing?
Great. Thank you, Ivan. Thank you for having me on this Her Corner series.
Thank you, Jean. And to many of us who know Jean Poon, she's a well-respected woman leader in talent acquisition. She has over 20 years of diverse experience, from HR, business partnering, to talent acquisition, to talent development. She has been in various industries, from pharmaceutical to medical devices, FMCG, and technology. Her last few roles include Asia-Pacific Talent Acquisition Director with Johnson & Johnson, Global Talent Acquisition Lead with Shire, who is now part of Takeda, Asia-Pacific Talent Acquisition Head with Dassault Systèmes, who is a French company. And today, she is an entrepreneur and thought leader in healthcare. And we have to mention about this very, very impressively. Jean has lived and worked in many countries across 4 continents. So Jean, which are the countries that you have lived in before?
Well, I've lived in the US, Boston, Australia, Sydney, Shanghai, Hong Kong, London, and now back in Singapore.
Wow, that's what we call as a true global citizen. Very impressive. Very impressive indeed. First question first, Jean. There are many successful women leaders out there today. What do you think has made you different from them?
I would not say versus other women leaders, but much more on what differentiated me was 3 things. So I'm very blessed to have an international experience across the 4 continents. So given the experience, I have learned to adapt myself to the different types of cultures and environments. And also given this experience, I'm much more open-minded and adaptable. And most importantly, I think it has given me the ability to be more aware of bias, especially in the nature of where talent acquisition is in terms of assessing talent. But it is human nature, right? I'm not there 100% to say that I am without bias, but I am much more aware than others. Bias can be created because of culture, the individual experiences, but it is important that in life and at work that we choose to reduce the bias, because it can create some missed opportunities, especially in choosing or assessing the wrong talent or the way that we work with that particular person.
Interesting points about bias. I'm glad that you brought that up. And leading to question number 2 now, Jean, tap on your expertise, which is talent development, talent hiring. When you interview the candidates, what do you look for when you speak with them?
On top of the technical competencies, right? I look for learning agility, number 1, given that the ability to learn and adapt to something new, to reapply. Number 2 is desire to be successful. Of course, success is defined differently for individuals. But what we need to understand is, what does success look like for them, and why do they want to be successful? The big why is important. And thirdly is the attitude towards failure. So especially at senior level, we tend to turn the failures into success stories. But as we know, not everything is a bed of roses. So in reality, we could actually share more about, at times when we feel how do we react to it, right? What do we reapply in terms of the learnings in other situations?
Thank you for that 3 points. I've taken note as well. Learning agility, desire to be successful, and attitudes towards failure. Thank you. Just back to the point about biasness earlier. Very often when we talk to the candidates, we form the impression within the first 5 minutes. What do you usually do? Within the first 5 minutes, when we realize that he or she is not the right person for the role, will you spend the next 1 hour talking to the person, or will you just within the next 5 minutes to say, thank you, nice to meet you, and we'll talk to you again?
I would actually really persist on and continue listening to that individual, maybe for 45 minutes to an hour. The reason behind it is because we might miss actually a lot of things if we don't listen more. So I give you a story, right, to share. And this is, I'm sure a lot of you have similar experiences, but this one really is one big demonstration of how I have suppressed my bias and did something right, I think, especially for the company. So this is probably 6-7 years ago when I was looking for a HR leader, a senior HR leader for the company, the second senior HR leader. And that I was interviewing this lady, and the first 10 minutes, my assessment of her is that she's more operational. But then I continue pursuing, listening to her. And what I have found is that she's actually had great experiences she has an international experience. She's a mature leader. She is also very action oriented. She gets things done. What she's probably need a bit more development is in the strategic thinking. But that can be learned, right? And given her experiences and her background, that's totally possible. So I did not put her as my number 1 in my shortlist, but I shortlisted her. And guess what? Today, she's actually the top international HR leader for the company. So I'm really happy, and I'm really glad I didn't succumb to my bias and did not shortlist her at that time.
Thank you for sharing with us that story. I indeed do have a similar experience as well, but that was a very good example. Thank you. And in this series, we're talking about senior women leaders, and there are senior women leaders in Western countries and senior women leaders in Asia. Do you see any difference between them in Western and Asia?
I would say yes, in my experience. And of course, that's in my experience. It could be different for everyone. I do experience that most Asian women leaders tend to be harder on women, unfortunately, because I think Asian women tend to just apply our standards on other women and not communicate the gaps clearly. Whereas I experience the Western leaders, the women leaders are much more empathetic. They tend to be more open in communicating what they see as developmental gaps, and that really helps.
And you yourself, you have lived in so many countries, both in Western and Asia region. How do you see yourself? Do you associate yourself to more of an Western woman leader or an Asian woman leader?
Great question. I think I'm both. I can be both. It really depends on the situations where I am, right? So if I'm with a group of more Asians, leaders and all that, I tend to be much more Asianized or even Singaporeanized, meaning that I will add my, as you know, in Singapore, there's a lot of the there, la, law. So I might add that in my speech, in my conversation. Whereas for the Western leaders, like I will be much more different in terms of my communication. At the end of the day, it's really thinking about who our audience is, right, and adapt to it. So that's really where I come from in terms of communicating the right message, so that or the messages that can relate to them.
Adapt, that exactly brings back to the first question when we talk about, what has differentiated you from the other senior women leaders. Adaptability, that's exactly the word that came out from you. But that's good to know. And earlier you also mentioned about it's learning, it's a lifelong journey. What would be your advice now for the future women leaders?
I really want to say that the world is your oyster, right? I do have several mentees across I wouldn't say the world, but really in France, in China, in Japan, in Korea. And I always tell them that, we are privileged in this era and in this generation. So be bold, right? Take bigger roles, overseas experience if you are offered, or even you seek to want to have one. Right? Don't let your inner voice tells you that, hey, I'm not ready for this. If you're not ready, nobody will offer that role to you. So that's one. Two is be authentic. Don't let anyone ask you to be who you are not. Right? And third is to be supportive of other women. Supportive doesn't mean that we abuse it or taking the privilege of being a woman, right? But really paying it forward, either to guide, to mentor, to buddy with other women, so that we can support each other for career advancement or even personal advancement.
You mentioned about be authentic and don't let anyone ask you to be who you are not. Very intrigued, in your career for the last 20 plus years, has any point in your career, has anyone told you to be who you were not?
Yes, actually, but the context has to be set right to explain this. So this is like about when I first started work, right, about 18, 20 years ago. And I was in my 20s, and this is where my manager told me, I need to look more, actually the word she used was older, because I need to look more professional, so that I can command a place at the table, or even have people listening to me because I'm in HR. And I asked, how can I look older, because I am young and I have my parents or my grandparents' genes, right, that I look young. And then she said, oh no, go and buy more jackets. You should also do makeup so that you make yourself look older. If I were to think of it as of now, like in the present moment, would I say that to my team? I think it's a different context as well, because like now there's a lot more younger leaders, and also I would and people wear casual clothes, right, to work all the time. Doesn't mean it's not a reflection of how professional they are. So I would say that it's a different context. But if you were to put me where I was then I would tell her that, look, I appreciate it, and I would really like to be who I am, right?
Thank you, Jean. That's a very interesting story. I appreciate you sharing that. Very relevant, that's for sure. With that, it wraps up our session today. On behalf of Kingsley Gate Partners, we truly appreciate your time, and thank you for sharing your journey with us. It's been very uplifting and very, very encouraging. We wish you all the very best in your next adventure. And thank you very much, everyone, for listening in to our corner office, the stories of successful senior women leaders.
Thank you, Ivan, for having me here. And to all the future women leaders out there, be bold, go for it.